Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
Commander Riken Taurus stood on the bridge of Vanguard's End, his battle-hardened gaze fixed on the holographic display of Valoria Prime, a distant colony teetering on the edge of collapse. The reports coming in were grim. The Kazakh Imperium, a war-hungry coalition of species, had begun their invasion. The Valorians, a proud but peaceful race known for their advanced scientific achievements, had no military to speak of. Riken's first officer, Lieutenant Era Sorn, shifted uneasily beside him. "The Valorians won't last another day, sir. The Kazakh are overwhelming their defenses." Riken scowled. "We're the only ones close enough to respond. What about the other fleets? The Zendar Collective? The Syndicate?" "None are sending help," Era replied, her tone bitter. "They're letting Valoria burn." For a moment, silence hung over the command deck. Riken's jaw clenched. It wasn't the first time the galaxy had turned its back on a species in need, but it never sat right with him. Not once. "They're not humans," Riken muttered, turning toward the comm officer. "Send a message to the Valorian High Council. Let them know we're coming." The bridge crew snapped to attention, and the ship's engines roared to life as Vanguard's End accelerated toward the besieged planet. Riken knew the odds. They were flying into a death trap, but humans had never been ones to back down from a fight, especially when no one else was willing to stand. "How many ground troops do we have on board?" Riken asked. "2 battalions, sir, but the Kazakh outnumber us 5-1, Era answered. "Good. That makes it fair." The once vibrant skies of Valoria Prime were now a raging inferno as Kazakh warships unleashed relentless orbital bombardments. From the bridge of Vanguard's End, Riken watched as the last Valorian outpost crumbled under the onslaught. "Shields to full," Riken commanded. "Prepare for atmospheric entry." The hull of Vanguard's End glowed as it tore through the planet's atmosphere, dodging enemy fire. Riken's heart pounded with the familiar thrill of combat, the adrenaline sharpening his focus. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a last stand for Valoria Prime. "Captain, we've got multiple Kazakh battle cruisers in the upper atmosphere. They're locking weapons on us," Era warned. "Bring us closer to the surface. We can't win a fight up here, but on the ground, we can make a difference." The ship groaned under the strain as it descended, the chaos of battle intensifying with every second. Explosions lit up the sky like fireworks as Kazakh fighters swooped in, taking pot shots at the human ship. Riken's voice cut through the din. "Deploy ground teams the moment we hit dirt. We need to hold the capital long enough for civilian evacuations." As Vanguard's End descended, human drop pods launched like comets, slamming into the surface below. Riken gripped the railing as the ship landed, the ground rumbling beneath him. The moment they touched down, the ramp lowered, and Riken and his elite strike team charged into the burning ruins of the Valorian capital. Valoria Prime's capital was a shattered husk of its former glory. Towering structures, once gleaming with the brilliance of Valorian science, now lay in ruin. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. Riken's boots crunched through the debris as his team advanced toward the city's central square. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the streets. Valorian civilians, scientists, engineers, and families huddled behind makeshift barricades, their eyes filled with despair. "They didn't stand a chance," Era murmured, her eyes scanning the ruins. Riken felt the weight of their hopelessness pressing down on him, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. "We're here now. That's all that matters." Suddenly, the ground shook as a squad of Kazakh soldiers rounded the corner, their hulking armored forms bristling with weapons. Without hesitation, Riken raised his rifle. "Fire at will!" Human soldiers moved like a precision machine, their rifles spitting death with terrifying accuracy. The Kazakh, known for their brute strength, were unprepared for the surgical precision of the human strike teams. They fell one by one, their towering frames crashing to the ground. "Advance!" Riken shouted as his team pushed forward, securing the square. The Valorian civilians watched in awe, their disbelief giving way to a flicker of hope. One of them, an elder with weary eyes, approached Riken. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice trembling. Riken glanced at her, his expression hard. "Because we had a deal." "A deal?" The elder seemed confused, her gaze searching his face. But everyone else? We're not like everyone else, Riken interrupted, his voice firm. He turned back to his team, his mind already calculating their next move. We've got civilians to protect. Let's make sure the Kazakh don't get another inch. The Valorian capital had become a battlefield. Human soldiers dug in, fortifying positions in the wreckage of the once great city. Every corner, every collapsed building was a potential stronghold against the advancing Kazakh forces. Riken's team worked quickly, setting up defenses, while the civilians were ushered into evacuation points. From their position, Riken could see the Kazakh regrouping, preparing for a final push. Their war cries echoed across the ruined cityscape, sending chills down the spines of even the most seasoned soldiers. "They're coming," Era said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Let them come," Riken muttered, checking his rifle. "We're not giving them an inch." The Kazakh charged, their hulking forms barreling through the debris like beasts unleashed. Plasma fire rained down on the human lines, but Riken and his team held fast. They moved with a precision that belied their small numbers, each shot finding its mark. The Kazakh fell, but for everyone that dropped, two more seemed to take its place. "We can't hold them off forever," Era shouted over the din of battle. "We don't need forever," Riken replied grimly. "Just long enough." The ground beneath them trembled as the Kazakh warlord, a massive figure wielding a crackling energy hammer, charged into the fray. His roar shook the battlefield, and his hammer struck with earth-shattering force, sending debris flying. "Heavy weapons now!" Riken barked. His soldiers launched rockets, the explosions rocking the warlord. But the beast barely flinched. Riken knew what had to be done. "With me!" he shouted, drawing his combat blade and charging at the warlord. Commander Riken Taurus sprinted across the rubble-strewn battlefield, his combat blade gleaming under the dying light of Valoria's burning skies. Around him, human soldiers kept the Kazakh forces at bay, their relentless barrage of plasma fire and rockets slowing the enemy's advance. But not for long. The Kazakh warlord, an immense armored beast, moved toward them like a force of nature, his energy hammer crackling with terrifying power. "Hold the line!" Riken roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. The warlord's red eyes locked onto Riken as if sensing his intent. With a deafening roar, the creature raised his hammer high and brought it crashing down toward the commander. Riken sidestepped at the last moment, the hammer pulverizing the ground where he had stood, sending shards of stone and metal flying. His heart pounded, but his focus remained razor-sharp. "Circle him!" Riken barked to his strike team as they flanked the warlord. Era Sorn, his first officer, moved with deadly precision, firing her pulse rifle to distract the creature. Another soldier, Sergeant Varric, launched a grenade that detonated against the warlord's thick armor. But the creature shrugged it off like it was nothing. The humans fought with everything they had, but this battle wouldn't be won with firepower alone. Riken ducked under another wild swing of the warlord's hammer, his blade flashing as he drove it into the creature's side. The warlord let out a guttural growl of pain, but swung again, faster than Riken expected. The hammer clipped his shoulder, sending him crashing into the debris. "Commander!" Era's voice crackled in his earpiece. Riken pushed himself to his feet, pain searing through his arm, but there was no time to stop. He wiped the blood from his brow and charged back in. Around him, his soldiers attacked with grim determination, their coordinated strikes slowing the warlord's movements. "Now!" Riken shouted. His team responded instantly, their fire focused on the warlord's exposed joints. Rockets screamed through the air, hammering into the beast's back. This time, the massive creature faltered. Riken seized the opportunity, lunging forward and driving his blade deep into the warlord's chest, just below the armor. The warlord bellowed, his roar shaking the very ground beneath them. But Riken didn't flinch. He twisted the blade with all his strength, and with a final shuddering breath, the warlord collapsed to the ground. The massive hammer clattered to the ground beside him, its deadly energy flickering out. For a moment there was silence on the battlefield. "Is it over?" Era asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Riken pulled his blade free from the warlord's body and stood, breathing heavily. "Not yet," he said, his gaze scanning the horizon. "This was just their leader. The Kazakh will regroup, and when they do, they'll come at us harder than ever." But as the humans stood victorious over the fallen warlord, a new sound reached their ears, something beyond the battle's chaos. Riken turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted movement in the distant sky. For a brief second, he thought it might be more Kazakh reinforcements. But it wasn't. Emerging from the clouds, sleek Valorian transport ships began to descend toward the city. Riken's heart leaped with hope. It seemed the Valorians had finally managed to mobilize their remaining civilian forces for evacuation. But the Kazakh weren't the only ones who could take advantage of the situation. "Get ready," Riken ordered. "We need to protect those ships." Era jogged up beside him, her rifle in hand. "If those transports get destroyed, we lose everything we fought for." The Valorian transports glided toward the evac points, their shimmering silver hulls a stark contrast to the burning ruins of their once great city. Riken didn't have time to admire the scene. His HUD blinked red, detecting multiple Kazakh forces converging on the evac zone. "They're going to hit the transports," Sergeant Varick shouted, his voice strained. "Not if we get there first," Riken replied, his tone cold and determined. "Era, take Alpha Team and hold the left flank. Varick, you're with me on the right. We're buying those ships as much time as we can." Without another word, the human forces split into two groups, moving swiftly through the broken streets of Valoria Prime. Plasma bolts whizzed past Riken's head as Kazakh soldiers emerged from hidden positions, launching their final assault on the evac zones. "Suppressing fire!" Riken shouted over the comms, and his team responded with a barrage of rifle fire and explosives. The battle for the evac points raged with brutal intensity. Kazakh warriors, still reeling from the loss of their warlord, fought with savage desperation. They hurled themselves at the human lines, but Riken and his soldiers held their ground. Every inch the Kazakh gained was paid for in blood, but Riken could feel the pressure mounting. The Valorian transports were lifting off one by one, but it wasn't fast enough. "Keep pushing," Riken ordered, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. "We can't let them break through." Era's voice crackled in his ear. "We've got heavy Kazakh artillery moving in. We can't hold this flank much longer." "Fall back to secondary positions," Riken commanded. "Draw them away from the transports." The humans retreated in an orderly fashion, moving from one fortified position to the next, luring the Kazakh forces deeper into the city's ruins. Plasma fire lit up the sky as both sides exchanged volleys of death. Riken's breath came in ragged gasps, but he refused to let exhaustion slow him down. Every minute they held the line was a minute closer to victory. Then, just as it seemed like the Kazakh might overwhelm their defenses, Riken's comm crackled with a new message. "Commander Taurus, this is Valorian High Command. The last of the civilians have been evacuated." Riken's eyes flashed with relief. "Copy that, Valoria. We're pulling out." He raised his fist, signaling to his team. "Everyone, fall back to extraction points. We've done what we came to do." With a final push, Riken and his soldiers broke away from the battle, retreating toward the waiting shuttles. Kazakh fire continued to rain down on them, but it didn't matter. They had done the impossible. Valoria Prime wouldn't fall today. As Riken boarded the shuttle, he took one last look at the burning city, a mix of pride and sorrow filling his chest. They had come to a planet that everyone else had abandoned, a planet on the verge of annihilation, and they had saved it. But there were still other battles to fight. Riken knew this war was far from over. "Take us up," he ordered, and the shuttle ascended into the darkened sky, leaving the broken world behind. As the shuttle rose above the smoldering ruins of Valoria Prime, Commander Riken Taurus let himself breathe for the first time since the battle began. His muscles ached, his armor was scorched and battered, and every breath felt like dragging fire into his lungs. But they had won. Against impossible odds, the human forces had held the line and given the Valorians the chance to escape. "Status report," Riken said, his voice rough. Era Sorn, seated beside him in the shuttle, tapped her wrist console. "All evacuation ships have made it off-world safely. Casualty reports are coming in, but it's grim. We've lost half of our ground forces." Riken nodded grimly, his jaw clenched. Half of his soldiers, friends, comrades, people who had trusted him to lead them, were now nothing but names on a casualty list. But their sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The Valorian people still had a future, because the humans had stood with them when no one else would. "We knew what we were signing up for," Riken said, almost to himself. Era glanced at him, but said nothing, sensing the weight of the moment. As the shuttle reached the orbit of Valoria Prime, the vast expanse of stars opened up before them. The fleet of human ships, battered but intact, hung like sentinels in the void. The Kazakh warships had withdrawn, retreating into the distant reaches of space. They had lost their warlord, and with him, their momentum. Riken suspected they would regroup, perhaps even come back in force, but for now the fight was over. "Captain," Era said softly, breaking the silence, "incoming transmission from the Valorian High Command? Put it through." The holographic display in front of Riken flickered to life, revealing the figure of Elder Niraval, the leader of the Valorian people. Her once calm, almost ethereal demeanor had been replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion. Yet in her eyes, Riken could still see the spark of hope that had brought them this far. "Commander Taurus," Elder Nira said, her voice heavy with emotion, "on behalf of the Valorian people, I extend our deepest gratitude. You and your forces have given us a chance at survival. We will never forget what you have done for us." Riken met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "We didn't do it for gratitude, Elder. We did it because it was the right thing to do. And for that, we are in your debt," Nira continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Your people have shown us what true honor and loyalty mean. You've reminded us that there is still hope, even in the darkest of times." Riken nodded but said nothing more. The moment lingered between them, a silent acknowledgement of all that had been lost and all that had been saved. Eventually, Niraval's hologram flickered out, leaving Riken and his crew to their thoughts. As the shuttle docked with Vanguard's End, Riken stepped onto the bridge, his eyes immediately drawn to the planet below. Valoria Prime, once a thriving hub of science and learning, now lay in ruins, its cities reduced to smoldering craters, its landscape scarred by war. But it still existed. The Valorian people had been given a chance to rebuild, to rise again from the ashes. "Commander," Ira spoke quietly from behind him. "What now?" Riken stared at the burning world for a long moment. The galaxy was filled with places like Valoria Prime, worlds on the brink of destruction, abandoned by the greater powers in the universe, left to fend for themselves. This fight had been won, but there would always be another. "Now we keep fighting," Riken said, turning to face his crew. "We keep standing for those who can't stand for themselves. We show the galaxy that humanity doesn't abandon its allies, no matter what." His words settled over the bridge like a solemn vow, and his crew nodded in silent agreement. They had faced the worst the galaxy could throw at them and come out the other side. There was no turning back now. Riken moved to the command chair and sat, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the bridge's viewport. The Kazakh Imperium was still out there, licking their wounds, plotting their next move. Other enemies lurked in the shadows of the galaxy, waiting for their chance to strike. But Riken knew one thing for certain. As long as he and his crew still had breath in their lungs, they would fight. "Helm," Riken said, his voice steady. "Plot a course for the next system. Let's see where we're needed." The ship's engines hummed to life, and Vanguard's End turned toward the endless expanse of space. Riken leaned back in his chair, his hand resting on the armrest where a worn patch bore the insignia of the United Terran Forces. He had fought many battles in his life, but this one felt different. It felt like the beginning of something greater. As the stars streaked past the viewport and the ship entered hyperspace, Riken allowed himself a rare moment of peace. They had won today, and tomorrow they would fight again, for the Valorians, for humanity, for all the species that the galaxy had forgotten. They would fight, and they would endure. The end.